Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining us for Margaret Kimball's book launch for this gorgeous book, And Now I Spill Family Secrets. I feel really lucky to be talking with Margie tonight. I've admired her work for a really long time now, and am very also excited to say my day job is I'm the art director of The Believer, and she's our cover artist for this month. Look at this gorgeous cover that she made, and the back. Our managing editor is exclaiming in the chat. I appreciate that. Thanks, Danielle. So Margie is a prolific illustrator. For those of you who don't know her work, check out her website. She does the most beautiful hand lettering. She's done it for places like the Smithsonian, Macy's, the Boston Globe, and a whole slew of publishers, and has made work for The Believer, Ecotone, Black Warrior Review, and tons of other places. I'm just like so blown away by this book. And for those of you who haven't purchased it, there's this green button, I think right there, maybe if you can see that, where you can get 10% off using the code event on Margie's book. If you already bought a copy, maybe buy another one. If you have bought already as many copies as your bookshelf can accommodate, maybe consider buying another book. So from what I've heard repeatedly from Zoom events from bookstores is that since COVID, a lot of people come to these, but they don't always buy the books from the bookstore. And this is like as a show of gratitude for Barbara's for hosting this event. Please do buy Margie's book, buy several books as a show of thanks. So we're going to start with a reading from Margie from the book.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And I'll just say too, in the chat, there's a link to Kristen to pre-order Kristen's book as well. CQ. So if you don't want to buy my book, buy Kristen's book. We're just coming out of Margie's book. Okay, so I'm going to do, just read from the beginning of the book, which if you haven't read it, is a little bit dark, but we'll get through it. It's just going to be like 10 minutes. So I'm going to share my screen because it's illustrated. So let me see if I can do that correctly. Okay. Kristen, is that looking right?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. All right, so chapter 1 is called The Secret. And there's like a little timeline. So it mostly takes place in 1988, but also in 2003. My mom was 31 when she decided to take her own life. It was Mother's Day, 1988. The morning air in Connecticut was cool and calm, and she asked my dad to take the kids to church himself. She would stay home, the holiday permitting her the excuse to take time for herself. Daffodils bloomed among the ivy alongside the driveway. My dad loaded the three of us, ages 6, 4, and 10 months, into our minivan for the 1-mile drive south to St. Augustine Church just off Main Street. We were still Catholic then, but not for long. Upstairs, my mom stood in front of her bureau, looked in the mirror, and saw her own mother, a madwoman whose skin, eyes, and hair had always matched her own. I'm schizophrenic, she thought. The kids will be better off without me. She scribbled a note, grabbed her pills and a bottle of vodka, then marched up to the clapboard shed in our backyard with a black leather belt. Inside, she fastened the belt around her neck, swallowed 13 pills, and let herself drop. She was unconscious before she hit the floor. This was her first attempt. This secret was kept for 15 years until my brother Ted called one afternoon. It was early summer and I was 19. I was driving 90 miles an hour down the highway when I answered my pink flip phone. Meg, he said, did you know Mom tried to hang herself? What? When? A state trooper appeared in my rearview mirror, lights flashing. When we were kids in the shed at the old house in Glastonbury. Did you just remember or something? I slowed down and swerved right. The state trooper followed. Whatever Ted said next was muffled as a memory flickered. I was maybe 4, standing in the doorway leading to our back porch, watching my father walk out of the woods. In his arms, he carried my mother in the pretty way of newlyweds, only she was limp-limbed and her eyes were closed. Asleep, I figured. My dad brushed past me, his brow furrowed as he took her upstairs to bed. In the car, I dropped speed, put a blinker on, and prepared for a ticket. The officer passed me fast on the left, a lucky break, and I stayed in the slow lane, considering this memory. Ted's voice snapped me back to reality. Don't tell anyone I told you, and if I ever get like that, I want you to take a gun and shoot me in the head. Chapter 2, The Trip Home, Part 1. In 2016, 13 years after my brother spilled the secret, I bit my lip as I waited for him at the airport in Connecticut. Since Ted's phone call in 2003, I'd circled the subject of my family like a tiger chained to a pole, scratching at our history, wondering what had happened to my mom and as a result to us. My parents had kept secret that first suicide attempt for so long. What else were they hiding? What else didn't I know? A trip home meant another chance to ask questions. Ted pulled up to the curb and popped the trunk. He remained in the driver's seat, his head hung low over the cell phone cradled in his hands. A pulled-up hoodie obscured his face. His puppy lay with its head down in the passenger seat, gloomy and lethargic. In the last 2 years, Ted and I had barely spoken, and I couldn't pinpoint why. Texts between us were rare, phone calls almost non-existent. When we did speak to each other, our voices strained, like whatever we meant to say was hidden beneath a fortress of lockjawed reticence. Once, he told me I knew nothing about him, which was impossible because Ted knew the totality of my life in a way no one else ever could. We were together for the elemental moments of childhood that forever marked us. We trudged along muddy paths together, scooped up frogs, and watched them pee defensively on our dirt-caked hands. Once, we even ran away together. We made it a half block from our house before sitting on the curb to discuss our future in serious tones. What will we eat? We asked each other. We rode the bus together every day of elementary school, and I relished the few times my teacher let me wait for dismissal with my brother in his classroom. Compared with my few friends, Ted had many, but still he was mine. Ted poured my first drink and rolled my first joint. He taught me how to drive and how to play cards. We survived the divorce together and our mom's illness. There's no one else in the world who can reduce me to the softest feelings of childhood with a single phrase, with just a look. I shoved my luggage in the trunk and buckled into the back seat. The dog stayed in front. Ted placed his cell phone on the dashboard, opened the camera app, and pressed record. Something wasn't right. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm targeted," he said. "I'm being followed." Tears rimmed his eyes. "They're following me," he said. Chapter 3, the videos. During the troubling visit home, my mom gave me a stack of old family videos transferred from film to CD. By the time I finally sat down to watch them, another year had ticked by. One afternoon, alone at my desk, I cracked open a beer and slid a disc out from its paper case. With my husband and daughter out of the house, I inserted one of the recordings into my computer drive and pressed play. The opening shot of the film shows the entrance sign to Blish Memorial Park in Marlborough, Connecticut, where my extended family has all gathered early to celebrate both the 4th of July and my little brother's birthday in 1988. My dad first appears in the video through a crowd, listening to someone off screen. He casts his eyes downward, clenches his jaw, and walks away. At my desk, I sipped beer and straightened my back, suddenly aware that I was watching us as a family, that I was about to see what we were like together before time had scattered us off to our separate lives. Playing on the screen in front of me was evidence that we'd been together, proof that we existed, with clues to our disintegration. The possibility that my memories were, to whatever degree, real and verifiable. So I watched, hoping to find answers to questions I hardly had language for about who we were during those years that shaped us. The camera pans to my mom, her black bangs teased with volume. She walks by my dad and touches his hair. He tenses and looks the other way. My dad is 29, my mom 31. They've been married for 8 years. The men all wear white collared shirts with some variation of stripes across the middle. Their white socks pulled high over topsiders. Their eyeglasses are enormous, gold-rimmed and down to the middle of their cheeks. The aunts all wear khaki shorts with sweatshirts. I turned over the CD's envelope in my hand. July 2, 1988. Was typed in bold across the flap. Wait a second, I thought, and pressed pause. I opened a file in my computer titled Notes and scrolled through. This file contained the missives I've typed up anytime my mom let slip a morsel of information about us, about herself, the kind of notes I've taken since I could hold a pencil. First suicide attempt, 1988. I picked up the phone to call her. "Mom," I asked gently, "do you remember the date you went to the hospital that first time?" She fell silent, and I knew she understood the euphemism. "I'm just watching the videos you gave me," I explained, and it occurred to me that they're from the same year. It was Mother's Day, she said like it was yesterday, May 8th, 1988. I got you dressed for church and asked your father to take you. I didn't plan to do anything. Mom, I interrupted, suddenly worried about upsetting her. It's okay, we don't have to go back there. I changed the subject. After the call, I checked the dates online. She was right. 1988, Mother's Day, May 8th, the day of a waning half moon. A younger version of me would have searched for meaning in the metaphor of a waning moon, but I was past the point of symbolism. What I wanted was to clear away the muck, to point to a date on a calendar and say this led to that, to watch a video and deconstruct the moments that led to our family's collapse and its aftermath. Here's what I knew. 2 months before this video was taken, my mom tried to hang herself in our shed. I wanted to find traces of the incident in our faces, in our movements, our interactions. Okay.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. That was so beautiful. It's so nice to hear it in your voice after reading it and loving it so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with, Margie and I are just going to talk, and I would love if, while we do, any questions that you have, you put in the chat, and I will share them with Margie throughout our conversation. Okay, I feel like this is the most boring question, but you're going to get asked it a lot, and I genuinely do want to know, because I don't think we've ever talked about it, but one of the things I really love about your work is that it's so bold, and it's like pretty much exclusively in black and white. And even within black and white, like you don't use a lot of gray, like it's so stark. And I'm curious about how that was that just like kind of an organic process that you just kind of always worked in that palette?
Yeah, it's I've been thinking lately there's something wrong with like the development of my eyes because like I love black and white the most. Like my whole house is black and white. Like I just like that combination is just like the thing that makes me feel happiest. And I don't like color. I like colorful things, but like they just don't quite make sense to me. Like I don't know how to combine colors. I don't know how to make colors feel as rich to me as black and white. So I just decided I was not going to force myself to do color. So I just stuck with black and white, and I added washes here and there to like kind of give more depth or a sense of like foreground and background. But it's just whatever happened with my development, with my eye development, I think is like, I think the reason why, but I don't have a great answer other than I just love black and white so much.
Yeah, I love knowing that your house is black and white. Like it just makes sense to me. Like whenever I think about like when I commissioned you for a cover, I was like, we've never done a black and white cover at the Believer, and it's like then as soon as I realized that, I was like, there's only one person that I want to do it. You know?
I was so happy when you were like, no gray, it's just black and white. I was like, I can do that.
It's really amazing. So another thing I love about your work and is that you have this real attention to like maps, diagrams, timelines. Did you come into that? And that's something I see in a lot of your work far beyond this book, but is that also like part of the way you process information?
Yeah, I feel like life is hard and there's a lot of like unknown things, or timelines can be confusing. People's stories can be confusing. I think with this project in particular, like every time I talk to somebody, there would be like a slightly different angle or a slightly different date or a slightly different piece of information. And I just like wanted to pinpoint like what happened and like what are the dates and what are the facts. And I got really obsessed with like finding information, any public records I could find, any documentation I could find that felt like real and verifiable. Like I just said, like it's just like, because I think our memories are just so fluid. And it's like I could ask my mom to tell me the same story 10 times and it would be a little bit different every time. And I'm like, well, there's a true fact somewhere. So like, I want to identify that and like write it down so that like I have that at least. So yeah, I think it just helps me kind of feel like I understand a narrative, I guess.
That's so interesting. So like in the book, you know, you talk about like fact checking memory. You know, I think you used that phrase once, or like misremembering things. There seems to be like a sort of, it's like a slight anxiety about misremembering. So it's really interesting. So it's like that verifiability was really important to you with this project.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know. I just feel like when there's like, first there's like stuff people don't want to talk about. Mm-hmm. So that's its own challenge. But then when they do talk about it, there's so much reluctance that I feel like you get these bits and pieces and it's so hard to figure out like, well, when did that happen? Or when did that part of it happen? Or like, why did it happen or whatever? And so, yeah, I've just always kept diaries and always been obsessed with like trying to remember stuff and like worried that I was going to forget it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you ever struggle with like what the word, like what true actually meant? Like you talk about people misremembering things or having different experiences. Like, was it hard for you to pin down like what version of the truth you were going to represent?
Yeah, the hardest one was, I hope my parents aren't on here. I doubt they are. But the hardest one I would say is, my mom like always says my dad had an affair, which I just don't believe. And so I'm like, okay. So I like talked to her about it. I haven't talked to my dad about it because he just like, I just don't think he'll talk to me about it. But I decided for that one, especially, like I was going to try and tell her perspective and then say like, but here's what I really think happened. And so like anytime I was running into that where like there's two versions or multiple versions and I felt like it was important to kind of represent that, I would try and say that like in the book so that it was clear that there was some ambiguity there.
Yeah. Interesting. So the book also, and I think a lot of your work is very much about like space. We talked about that with maps. So like largely the book is pretty absent of people, except for when you're referencing like a document, like a photo or a video. Was that like an intentional choice?
Yeah. So yes. So I think it kind of like this method, whatever style this is or however my approach is really organic. Like I didn't read comic books as a kid, mm-hmm. and I always wrote a lot. And so this form kind of just developed, like mm-hmm. It probably started in college when I was starting to write more. And I never drew people. And I don't know why, like, I don't know if it's just because they're hard, but I think like more of what I like is this kind of like immersion into environments, you know, mm-hmm. like I like reading comic books with people or graphic novels with people, but I think for me, I just wanted the readers to be able to like place themselves in the houses I lived in, because place is just so important to me, or it's so important to my memories. It's just like a strong like mm-hmm. association. So I just wanted, readers to be able to kind of be in that space and like see my bedroom and see the stuff on the floor and see like the houses and stuff like that. So that's like the intentional reason. But it's also hard to draw people.
But it's interesting because like by drawing a space that a person inhabits, it's also like a different kind of portraiture in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it's in some ways feels more representative because it's like, you know, the stuff you collect around you, the things you accumulate, and then the stuff that just gets tossed, you know, like I think like our houses, especially my parents' houses, were so different. Like mm-hmm. one was really cluttered, one wasn't. And so I think that has a really different feel. I know it did as a kid for me. So I kind of wanted that sense.
Yeah. So I feel like the book is kind of like about playing the role of like an archivist, you know, but there's also like a kind of like detective quality to it. Like you literally use the word, like even in your reading, you used the word clue, like you were looking for something. What were you trying to figure out? Like, is the investigation that's on the page the same investigation that was sort of like fueling the project for you?
I think at first I had no idea. I just like had this sense that like a bunch of shit had gone down mm-hmm. and like no one was talking about it. But it seemed to like impact us, like in weird ways, like, you know, my parents' behavior or like their choices they would make or whatever. And so I just felt like, what happened here? Like, why can't I know? And so I just had that sense. So I think in the beginning I didn't really know, but then as I started working more and like when the book went under contract, really, like I was like, I need a clear timeline and I need as much documentation as I can find, because otherwise it's just like all of us saying our memories, which is fine, but like it feels like so flawed to do it that way. So I just wanted to find like as much information, and I just love it. Like, I just love, like, I mean, I have all these old, I should have brought some, like some of the old maps from like my great grandparents, like land and stuff and their contracts. And like, they had these disputes with their neighbors, and I just have all that stuff. I don't know why it was kept or why I have it. I have no idea, but I just like looking through it because it like really gives a clear kind of map of like what happened, at least, you know, in points anyway.
So you've kind of always been a collector of those things, like even before you started this project.
Yeah. And I think like with the diaries, I mean, I have all these ridiculous things from childhood that like I really need to get rid of, but like an old rock collection or like a wooden turtle I got at a museum when I was like 7. Like, why do I have that? You know, it's like so stupid, but I like look at it, I'm like, oh, that's like a nice memory or whatever. So it's like,
so that's why you have it seems like
it feels like I was really there. Like it really happened. I remember it right.
It's like evidence.
Yeah.
While we keep having this conversation, go ahead and click the ask a question button if you want to ask Margie something, and I'll read it to her. So you started, you have a degree in creative writing. Were you, when you were in graduate school, were you making work like this, or were you writing prose?
No, I was working on this project, but it was like really different. I mean, you know, being in grad school, like in workshop, you hand in an essay, like you don't hand in a book chapter, or I mean, you probably could, but it just kind of needs to be self-contained so that the workshop can actually give you feedback. So every chapter was like very self-contained. I mean, they were horrible if I look back at them, mainly unreadable, but, and I think some of my former workshop people are on here tonight, so sorry for that. But I've been working on trying to figure out this project for a long time. So yeah, in workshop too.
Was your style pretty similar then, or did it sort of evolve over time?
It evolved. I wish I could show you. I found something the other day, like, so there were always like the word bubbles and the like kind of spaces, but it like wasn't always grounded. So there'd be like, you know, I'd mention like a cup we used or something. So I'd like have a floating picture of a cup and then like words coming off of it, but like it was just kind of isolated in space. So I think for like, you know, with this, I just tried to make everything more scenic and prettier and make more sense. So.
Yeah. Well, Beck is here to argue and say the grad school work was amazing and inspiring. And they wonder what surprised you most about your writing process in creating this book, not in the content, but the process itself.
I think a few things surprised me. One was how much information I was able to find. And part of it, I mean, I should say my mom found a lot of it. We applied for Italian citizenship at one point, like we were just doing that separately. And my mom found all these divorce papers and all these certificates and all these things. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Thank you. So I was surprised that stuff existed, and like then realized that I had access to public records being a family member. So I could just go badger people for them. So that was kind of amazing. And then I would say like how my family kind of changed over time. Like, I mean, it took like 15 years. So I don't recommend this process to anybody, but like at first nobody, like when my parents realized I was like writing, they were so angry and they just like refused to talk to me about anything. And then over time, I feel like they almost wanted to talk about it. Like they'd been carrying around all this stuff with them for so long that, like, my mom especially was just like, became more and more willing to just kind of tell me anything I wanted to know. And my dad,
what do you think changed there?
I think they just got tired. Like, I think they became less scared of me, you know? And when it started, they were just like, oh my God, what is she going to say? And I think they carry so much shame from, I mean, these are like the worst moments in their lives.
Yeah.
And so, and I was, you know, if I was 4 or 10 during them, like, what am I going to say? Like, what do I remember of it? So I think they were just afraid, but I think over time they just kind of let it go, and they trusted me a little bit more to like do my best to like represent everything fairly. And I think they just understood that this was like a process I needed to go through. So long-winded, sorry, Beck.
Have you had conversations with them about it now? Like, how do you feel about it now? Like, have you felt like anxious?
I feel anxious about my dad. My mom is fine. She's like, you know, being very pleasant and nice about it all.
Good job,
my
Mom.
dad the other day said, I was like, you know, he's actually moving here to Indianapolis. And I was like, you know, maybe you should read the book after you move so you can't like change your mind. And he was like, he's like, I am going to do that. And then he's like, I think it's going to be something we just never speak about. And I was like, oh, so we're just perpetuating the whole, like, not talking about things. But obviously I wouldn't let him do that. We're going to talk about it and deal with it. But,
sounds very Midwestern.
Yeah. He has some kind of, hating to talk about things, but so he's a little nervous about it, but he'll be fine over time.
Yeah. Cool. It's awesome that he's moving close.
Yeah.
You can force these conversations.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of a common trope. Like, I mean, I relate to that a lot with my family. Like when I write things, it's just something we don't, like, I have no idea what they think because we don't talk about it. So I relate to that a lot.
Do you want to ask them?
No.
Okay.
I feel like it's an act of kindness that they don't bring it up.
Do they read it though? Like they read your writing?
Who knows?
Wow.
Yeah, okay. I think my dad does, but that's maybe it. So Daniel Kambiner, great, amazing novelist and the managing editor of The Believer, says, do you feel like this book has led you to a new related next project, or do you want to do something completely different next?
So I'm working on a new project. So I finished this and I was like, I'm never writing a book again because in many ways it's a miserable experience. But I, of course, started writing immediately. So I'm working on a new project that is visually, I think, will be kind of the same style, but it's about like relationships I've had with men. So it's a little different. It's more about me.
Well, we should just go on tour for our men books together.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh, her next book is Terrible Men. Yeah.
So how does that feel, that project feel different than this one, or does it feel like, are you approaching them in a similar way?
You know, I feel really informed by the whole like investigative process. And so like, once again, I'm trying to go through like all this documentation and all this, like any evidence, you know, or like stuff I have to kind of like put together timelines and understand like what was said and what decisions were made and why they were made, and then like what the consequences were. So I think the process like feels similar to me.
Interesting. When you set out to make a project, do you feel like you have like a central question you're trying to investigate, or are you just trying to see where it takes you?
I think it's more of the latter. I think like I have a sense that like I need to deal with something, or like something happened that I'm not happy about, or I'm not uncomfortable with, or I'm ashamed. You know, yeah, I think shame is a big thing. Like with both the books is like this sense of shame that I've felt for a long time. Like with mental illness, like I just felt so ashamed that like it was in my family and that it was, you know, I thought for a long time it was going to affect me. Like I was going to be bipolar or something. And I think that was really scary. And so I just like writing is a way for me to like wrap my head around that, I think. And so I think just having that sense of like shame or secret or like hiding something and being like, and then finally realizing like, I don't want to have that anymore. Like I need to like live a better life is like how it starts. And then eventually like it becomes more clear probably what I'm trying to do. But
so do you feel like the act of writing or drawing a book kind of like is like a sort of exorcism on like, do you feel like you've like come to terms with or you understand something about your life or yourself better by the end? Like, is there a sort of catharsis to it, or is it just like horribly painful the whole time?
I mean, it's horribly painful the whole time, but at the end, I feel like I can talk about things. Like I'm not afraid of them anymore. Like if I don't, you know, I feel like I repeat myself all the time. So sorry if I've said this before, but I just feel like once you have language for something, it's less scary. It's not this like big ball of feelings or whatever. It's like, okay, so this happened. I can say it. It's fine. Like, you know, shit happens to everybody and move on. I think like when I'm not talking about something, it feels like frightening and like maybe I don't understand it. And yeah, it just feels like it needs to be dealt with. So it's kind of like therapy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does it feel like that for you or not?
No, it feels just horrible the whole time. I don't like whenever I'm always like very curious when I hear people talk about like like how it's like cathartic or they like exercise something out of them. I'm like, I can't relate to that at all. Like that sounds great.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I mean, there is, you know, something I think like you do learn an awful lot about yourself by making a book, like whether it's about yourself or not, you know, like I think the way you like process information or the way you like the connections that you make or something like that, like you learn I mean, I think the most miraculous part about making a book is that you're smarter by the end of the book than you were at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool. So how did you start? I'm curious about how you started drawing. Like, were you always like a doodler?
Yeah. My old diaries when I was little, like have little drawings in them. Once in a while I would try to write fiction, but it was like always like a veiled attempt at like giving myself a better name and like, you know, writing that I was a princess or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, no. And then I just always took art classes. And yeah, no, I've just always drawn. I don't know. I used to spend hours. I mean, I would get sent to my room a lot, but I would spend hours and hours and hours in my room just like drawing. And it was like so peaceful for me, you know, and in the same way that it is now. It's like I just come in my office and like sit down and it's quiet and I can just draw. And it's like this flow feeling that I really like. So
is it like relaxing for you to draw? Does it feel like a sort of like what's more difficult for you, the writing or the drawing?
I mean, many times they're both miserable. I feel like writing can be, I guess I'll just say what's miserable about both of them. So I feel like
only talk about misery for the
yeah, I'm only gonna talk about the miserable stuff. Like with writing, it's like I can just write pages and pages and pages and just like throw it away, and then it's just like it's garbage, and then I'm like I've wasted so much time, and like sometimes I just like don't like myself for like whatever I'm writing, or I'm like, oh, like stop talking about yourself, like whatever. So I feel like that can be exhausting, like trying to figure out what I'm trying to say or what I want to write. And with drawing, I think the hardest part is like figuring out what to draw sometimes. Like sometimes it's totally easy. I'm like, oh, I know exactly the house I want to draw. I know the space I want to draw, the car, like whatever. And then sometimes I just have no idea like what I'm supposed to be drawing. And so that process can be hard. But both have like these glorious moments of like peaceful calmness. So I don't know.
Patri would like to know, can you talk about your process a little bit? How do you approach the art and the writing and putting them together?
Yeah. Hi, Patri. I write everything first. have a notebook here somewhere.
Oh, you do? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I've tried to write and draw at the same time, but it just never works. And I mean, the book has so many words in it. Like, it couldn't be a comic book because it would be 4,000 pages. Yeah, but so I write everything out longhand, and then I revise. And then once I get that to like a good place, then I'll start drawing. So that's that process. And then, yeah, putting them together, I think it's just going through and seeing like what I want to represent visually from each writing section.
Do you like, when you're writing it out, are you like making notes about what the drawings will be, or is that completely later?
It's totally later. Like, sometimes at the very beginning, like, I'll draw stuff, but it's more like when I started this second book project, I was drawing, but like before I was writing, but it's like all garbage. Like, it's nothing I'm going to use. And I think it was just a way for me to try and figure out like what I was going to do. So now I'm just writing. And then once that feels totally finished to me, I'll start drawing. Yeah.
And how do you draw first? Do you do it by hand or digitally?
I do so by hand. So I will do like storyboards to try and figure out just like quick little thumbnail kind of sketches. There's actually some on my website from this book, if that doesn't make sense to anybody, but what a storyboard is, but just little to get a sense of like the page flow. Then I draw the pages by hand, and then I ink on an iPad.
Okay. And how did you get into so for those of you who don't know, Mark, he does like gorgeous lettering. Was that process to you like similar to how you came into drawing? Were you always just like writing these like beautiful loopy letters? Like, how did that process happen? Did you take like calligraphy classes?
No, I've always been like obsessed with handwriting. And I was just talking about this to my poor daughter the other day, who's a perfectionist, but I used to we didn't have a computer when I was a kid. So like if I had a paper to write, I would like write it in pen, but if I made a mistake, I would start the entire thing over. It's like, it's just exhausting.
You're like torturing. It was your first act of self-torture.
Yeah. I'm a masochist. So I would try and get that all right. But I think I just started seeing some illustrators doing hand lettering, and Jessica Hische had a beautiful lettering project, the Daily Drop Cap, and it just was inspiring. And I was like, I like letters too. And so I just kind of started messing around. And then a few years ago, I got a little more serious about it because I realized, because people started hiring me for it, and I was like, I should get better at this. So I started studying letter forms a little bit more closely then.
But it feels like a separate skill to drawing. Like, it feels like, I mean, I know there are a lot of artists who have horrible. I mean, I am a horrible my handwriting is like, it looks like I'm just like a murderer. Like, if you look at it, it's absolutely horrible. Like, it's like, I'm very ashamed of it, but it does feel like a separate, like, I mean, you're approaching them like an art form the same way you would, like, I guess it's all shapes, but it does feel like a different part of the brain.
No, it really does, because it's easier in a lot of ways, because it's like, I know the word I want to write, I know the letters I want to write, and I just have to figure out which, what kind of feeling or style I want them to be. And then it's more technical. It's like just refining and getting the balance and the proportions right. And so I think that's one of the reasons I like it, is because it feels a lot less like there's less at stake. It's like I'm drawing a word, it doesn't matter, or like or I can just fix it or change it or whatever, whereas like when I'm drawing like a childhood home, I'm like, it has to be represented perfectly, like my clothes and my bed and my stuffed animals.
That's so funny. I mean, there are like moments in the book too where you'll like identify something that's like wrong. You'll be like in the kitchen, there was like a bowl, and you're like, that was on the counter, and you're like, this was actually on top of the fridge. It's so funny.
I know. Well, I feel like you and I might not. I feel like we might be different in this way. I don't know, but you can tell me. But I feel like it's probably because I'm like an obsessive overshare of things, but I feel like I have always had this like impulse to get things like exactly right. Like when I'm telling somebody something, if I say it like a little bit wrong, I'm like, no, like, hold on, let me rewind and like tell you exactly what I meant. It's like mind numbing to anybody listening to me. But I feel like I felt the same when drawing things. Is like if I did something a little bit off, I'm like, I feel like I need to say that I did it differently because I want to be honest. Like, yeah. But I know that not everybody agrees with that. Ridiculous.
No, I mean, I think it's like a very admirable quality. And I think it's also like it really informs the project. Like I used the word archivist before, but it does feel like the book is so much in service of like identifying. Like I love the way you use arrows, for example, to literally identify and call things out. And it's also like it's like a second narrative, you know? Like,
yeah. And that's what I love too, is like it just gives this other layer, because there's so much that I think that was something that I struggled with early on, is like, how do you represent memory when it's so layered and there's so much to it and you always have to leave something out? And that to me is like horrifying as the person who wants to be like, let me tell you precisely what happened. So I felt like with the kind of diagrammy type of illustration, I could, really like give extra information if anybody wants to spend time reading it. But I enjoy it, so.
That's great. Has the sort of the drawing of a place ever like changed your memory of it?
So I imagine so. Like I feel like my brain does a pretty good job of just like erasing any former memories and just keeping the most recent ones. I feel like looking at photographs has changed my memory of places. And so I think drawing them has as well, but I don't know in what ways.
How have photographs changed your memories?
They just become stronger. So I'll just like remember something stronger. Like, I have some old picture, I think it's actually in the book, of like me and my little brother when he was a baby and me singing a towel. And it's just a picture of us. And I'm like, oh, I remember that night. But I'm like 5. Like, do I remember that night? I'm sure I don't remember that night, but it's like, I can feel the towel and I remember sitting on my floor and I remember the bedroom. And so I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's made a memory there, but maybe there's some element of truth to it. Cause like we have these like old ratty towels, like maybe that's something, I don't know.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, it's kind of like storytelling. Like, when someone tells you a story all the time about, like, there's this story that my grandfather always used to tell me about how when I was a kid and it was Christmas and I was opening up a present and I thought it was a toy and it was a block of cheese and I was furious and threw it across the room. Apparently I was like 4 or 5 or something. And I swear I remember that exactly. And there's just no way, but it's like, but I think photos work in that same way. And I think writing about it does too. Like it helps you reshape or reframe it to the point where I think it can actually, I mean, it depends on, I guess, how you feel about that, whether or not you think that that's a hindrance, but it does feel like it.
Well, yeah, no, I just sorry to interrupt. I feel like, it is like, there is this moment where it's like, when you write about something or draw or whatever, it changes. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm like choosing angles, I'm choosing things. And I worry that like it takes some of the brightness out of like that initial memory I had or something, but what can be done?
So Kelsey, another is in the chat, another amazing graphic artist. Did you always plan to make a graphic memoir even when you were in grad school writing essays, or when and how did you figure out you could and give yourself permission to do it visually?
Yeah, so in grad school, I was doing visual essays. So they were graphic essays. And I was only let into the program. So I went to grad school for art and I wanted to take writing classes. And one professor said, absolutely not. And then another professor said, only if I add pictures. So, because he saw some of the stuff I was doing in the art program. So the whole time I was doing graphic stuff. Once in a while, I would hand in an essay with no pictures and get just like, I don't know, ripped apart in a workshop. But
workshop's such a fun place.
I know, it's part of the fun.
So you were doing art first?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wanted to go to school for design, not because I wanted to be a designer, but because I really wanted to be an illustrator, but I was like, I can make money as a designer, so I need to learn how to do that. So I went to grad school for that, but all I did was illustrate the whole time. So
yeah, that's like, I feel like the common thing. I went to art school for undergrad. I ended up switching to writing my second year, but it was the same thing where I was like, I'll go be a graphic designer. I didn't even know what that meant, you know?
Right. I didn't.
Especially like, this was like, this was for me, it was like, I was in college in like 2005. Like, well, I didn't even know what graphic, like, it was just like a totally different thing. I was like, I thought I'd be making like logos or whatever.
Yeah.
So who are your, you said you didn't grow up reading comics. So like, did you feel like you had models for this book?
Well, I eventually in grad school came across like Alison Bechdel, Marjane Satrapi, David B., Craig Thompson, like just, the people who've written like many classic graphic novels. So I feel like, or graphic memoirs, I should say. So they all informed me in terms of like storytelling and pacing and like how to render scenes. But I can't do panels. Like I've tried and like, they feel so restrictive to me. And I'm still trying, like I'm doing a piece now that like I'm trying to have panels, but it's really hard. And then I write too much. So
it's so interesting. Can you say more about why you find them restrictive?
They're just so small. And like, I don't know if it's the language that feels more restrictive. Like when I try to do it and I try to cut back and pare back my language to make it, short enough, really, it's like, I feel like I'm leaving so much out that it's like not me anymore. I'm like, I don't even know what this is. So I think that's like the main thing. But then visually, I mean, they're so small and I like to draw so much detail that like, I mean, I've seen it. Like, okay, have you read, you probably haven't read these, but the Babysitter's Club graphic novel.
I did not know they existed. Did read the Babysitter's Club, but the original version. Tell me more. Tell me everything.
Okay, so I did not read the original, so my daughter is obsessed with the graphic novel versions. Raina Telgemeier illustrated the first like 5, and then other people are doing more now. But they're like amazing. Like they're great stories, and the illustrations are just fabulous. Like there's so much detail in them. And so I actually used her, like I read all of them and like some of her illustrations, I was like, oh, I'm going to do like the, there's one I keep showing everywhere because I love it so much, but I basically stole it from Raina Telgemeier. But it's this picture of, I won't be able to find it, this, like where it's like this angle into the house, which probably is like, yeah, duh, like anybody could do that. But I saw it in the Babysitter's Club and I was like, oh my God, I have to do that. It's amazing. I love it. And so I would go through and like try and find panels that I liked with like a lot of detail and stuff. But yeah, I just can't do real panels because there's something in my brain that just doesn't allow me to get enough detail. She does a good job, Raina Telgemeier, and I highly recommend the books for fun reading and inspiration. But yeah,
I mean, panels just seem like a different way of. I don't feel like it's like. You're almost presenting it like as like a shortcoming, but I feel like it's just a different way of communicating ideas that isn't very conducive to your style, which is so. Like I said, you don't really draw people. Like you're not really drawing narrative drawings. Like you're drawing, like they're not images that are like, it's not like a person like going down the stairs, it's not like a person like,
right, yeah.
Like getting into the car or whatever. Like it's not about moving the plot. It's more like, they're more like set pieces. You know what I mean?
I guess you're right. I feel like maybe I spend so much time on the writing part of like, trying to create momentum and scene. And so then I just don't do that in the visual part. So maybe you're right. I should think of it like that.
Thanks, Barbara's Bookstore, for putting that. If you've already bought 5 copies of Margie's book and are looking for another way to support Barbara's Bookstore, there you go. Babysitter's Club graphic novel.
Totally worth
but
reading.
It reminds me in a certain way of like in Adrian Tomeny's Killing and Dying. There's that story that that's like a translation. Do you know what I'm talking about? And it's not, they're in big panels, like there's still panels, but it's maybe like maybe two drawings a page, and they're like atmospheric rather than.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I know the book and I've read it, but I don't know the specific piece you're talking about. I read it a while ago. I love his illustrations.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. He's definitely he's my version of the Babysitter's Club when I am stuck.
Okay. I mean, he's fantastic. Yeah. I look at his work a lot too, and I just like marvel at it because there's something so peaceful about it. Like it's organized in a way that just feels like you can just like enter into it. And yet, even when he's like drawing a bunch of clutter, drawing a bunch of like mess or whatever. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in that way, it's really related to yours. I mean, I also think about, sometimes when I'm reading your work, I think about Chris Ware because he has such an attention to space and to buildings and structures and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's great.
What have you been, were there any books in particular you were looking at you were reading while you were writing or drawing this book?
Yeah, but they weren't graphic memoirs. So I read one book that like really helped me in the like investigative aspect was, I think her name is Laura Cummins, and the book was called 5 Days Gone, and it's about, have you read it?
Mm-mm.
It's about her mom as a child was like kidnapped for a few days, for just like 5 days, and then returned. And
casual 5 days.
Just a casual 5 days kidnapping. And so it was like, well, what the F happened? And so it's her investigation of like what happened. And ultimately it's kind of interesting. It's like the dad had an affair and had a child.
Wow.
But like they had agreed to like raise the child in the married couple, but then the biological mom was like, wanted to take her back, obviously. And so kidnapped her for a few days, but then eventually gave her back. Sorry, that's like a big spoiler, but I think you learned that pretty quickly. Maybe. I don't remember.
It reminds me of Maggie Nelson. One of Maggie Nelson's early books is called Jane, a Murder, a Murder, which is an amazing title. And it's about her aunt who was murdered before she was born. And I think it's interesting in the way that writers, and I think your book is evidence of that, like you can become very fixated on things that seem like somehow part of your life, even if they happened before you even existed, you know?
Yeah. Which is like, I feel like so hard to talk about because there's this part of me that's like, it shouldn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't affect you. Like, you know, it doesn't affect me. Like, just move on. Who cares? But it really does. Like I know there's all this study of psychological or inherited trauma, which I don't really know about, but I feel like all these like miniature decisions that happen that just like really shape your whole life. Yeah. I mean, for me, you know, I think of my parents' divorce and like the custody and everything. And like, I feel like they were so informed by their parents and their upbringing that I wasn't a part of. And yet it shaped my entire life. So yeah.
Do you remember, like, if you page through the book now, can you remember kind of like, did you write it? Did you write it in order? Did the structure change a lot? Can you kind of remember where you started with the project?
I think like this version of it. So it took such a long time, but yeah. So I went to a residency at McDowell and I had like pieces of the book and I was like, I had a 2-week residency and I was super busy and I'm like, I just need to put this thing in order and like go start to finish. And so there I just drafted the entire thing. I mean, you know, pieces of it were there and I put it all in order. And then I think I worked in order from that point on. Except for like the later revisions, like when I had an editor and she was like, I want you to develop. She really wanted me to develop like the generational aspect, like the generational kind of talking about mental illness in that way. And so I kind of had to go through different pockets of the book and like expand them out a little bit.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I tried to work in order. I don't know why. It felt like I could understand like one thing leading to the next if I did that.
Yeah. And you can get a sense of like visual flow in that way too.
Yeah.
So what was the experience like? You've been working on this for so long. What was the experience like when you started then working with an editor?
It was amazing. I worked with Hillary Swanson, who's just fantastic. she had really great feedback. I mean, like I said, her biggest suggestion was like to kind of talk about mental illness in a more generational kind of way rather than just like with my mom or something. And she was just fantastic. Like she would give me a suggestion, I'd go work on it, and then she'd just like slash through it and fix it. And then I would work on it again, and like she was just great. And I feel like and then from there, when I started drawing everything, it was like they were basically fine with anything I drew.
Yeah.
They just worked really hard on helping to get the story like exactly right.
That feels like a really common experience, I think, for graphic writers.
Does it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Have your editors not like push back on any?
You know, people always ask like, how do you edit a graphic novel? You know, which I always find kind of silly because it's just a book, you know, like you edit it like you edit a book, you know, but it is different. And I do feel like sometimes people feel like a sort of self-consciousness about critiquing an image.
Yeah.
In the way that they don't with text. I mean, certainly not like in the art world or something like, but I think, and I wonder why that is.
I mean, I don't know, but I have found the same thing. So like when I was in the art program in grad school, I would try and get feedback on my writing, and like the art professors just had like, some of them were like big readers, but it was like they had no idea what to say. And so that's why I went into the writing program. But the writers would like never really say anything negative about the illustrations. They'd be like, oh, great pictures. And I think it would distract them even sometimes. Like I feel like some of my pieces got passes through workshop, no offense workshoppers, because of the illustrations, which are distracting. So it's hard to like find somebody who's willing, my husband's willing to do it, to critique both.
So is mine.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. There is something that feels like the people are maybe like slightly less rigorous with it or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that is because like drawing is a different language, and then talking about that is a different, you know, is in a different way, or I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it is like, you know, I feel like now that I'm thinking about it, it's like sometimes I get nervous. So my husband's like a fiction writer, and sometimes I get nervous to like give him feedback because I'm like, I don't know fiction. And he's like, but you're a reader and you know like human stories. So like just talk like a person about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I actually can do that.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it might be the same thing where it's like, I don't know what to say about a picture, but like as a human being who has seen things in the world, you do know how to say something about a picture.
Yeah, totally. So we probably have time for one question. We have one from Sam that says, my memoir mentor has been emphasizing the question of, quote, why now? Did you have that experience with your editor, needing to tie your story with the current culture?
No, I know that question. I don't agree with the question because I think that like stories are inherently interesting, and it's the oldest story in the world, right? You sit down with somebody and you're like, tell me about yourself. And so I think I had plenty of professors say, why you, why now? And I'm like, I don't know, why not? Why you? Why are you asking me this question? Like, so I just think that question can be crippling. I think you just have to believe and trust. You know, we had that question in your class too. Yeah, oh, I should tell everyone I took Kristen's class. It's great, and you should take it. But yeah, so I feel like you just have to get that out of the way, because it's like you just have to trust that your story is interesting enough and you can work at it enough to tell it in an interesting enough way that people will be engaged with it. And I think trying to tie something into the culture changes so fast, and like a book takes 2 years to come out usually. So
I've read it for about 15 years. Yeah. 15 years plus 2.
I know. Like, why? Yeah.
Chris Ware famously said, graphic novels take years to draw and minutes to read. So there is sort of that agonizing. I remember once being on the subway in the before times, and there was a high school kid down on the other row, and he was just reading a graphic novel like this. And I remember just being like,
I know. I've gotten all these emails from very kind people being like, I read your book in a night.
I read it in an afternoon.
Yeah, and it's like so nice. I'm like, thank you for taking the time, but I'm also like, yep, that's how long it takes.
So I guess the last question, there's one more question. Lisa is wondering about how your siblings felt about the book. I loved the dedication in the book to your siblings. Did you talk to them about it while you were making the book?
Yeah, I did. Well, I talked to my younger brother the most. I talked to my older brother a bit, but what I talked to him about is basically in the book.
Yeah.
I didn't talk to my sister because she was so young during it, and like it just felt so much about me and my brothers. And she comes into it and I adore her, but I just felt like it was so much about our kind of family unit breaking apart that I didn't really ask her, but she's fine with it.
I mean, there's such beautiful portraits of like how much you love your siblings. I think it's really lovely.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight from your living rooms and couches. Another reminder to click the green button and buy this book or buy several copies. And thanks so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Kristen. This is like lovely to talk to you. And
it was really fun.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.